Welcome. It's story time. Cozy up, turn down the lights, and settle into wind down. Whether it's a classic tale, a forgotten piece of history, or a lesser-known gem, you're in for an relaxing escape. So grab a blanket and let the stories take you away. Don't forget to subscribe for your next cozy adventure. Lavinia and John Fisher, the questionably charming innkeepers of Charleston, South Carolina, were, on the surface, the kind of people who could smile at you while stealing the coat off your back. And in the early 1800s, running an inn was no small task. Equally, running an inn where travellers were never seen again. Well, you'll see. Inns were like the Wild West of customer service, minus the Yelp reviews. Just dusty stopovers for tired travellers who needed a meal, a bed, and perhaps a healthy dose of bad decisions. The Fishers operated the 6 Mile Wayfarer House, which, despite its ominous name, was supposedly nothing more than a pleasant rest stop 6 miles outside of town. What could possibly go wrong in a place with all the creative naming of a mile marker? Well, if rumours are to be believed, quite a lot. You see, some of the guests who checked in didn't exactly check out. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, understand that this wasn't the Fishers' fault, at least according to them. Sure, it didn't help that local gossip painted them as some sort of Bonnie and Clyde with better hospitality. But when locals started noticing missing travellers, questions began to swirl. Of course, charming as they were, Lavinia and John smiled their way through the whispers, leaving the townsfolk unsure whether to hand them a bouquet or a torch. Things escalated when a few brave locals, likely the same types who'd rush into a burning building with a bucket of water, decided to take matters into their own hands. They formed a vigilante group, otherwise known as the 19th century version of a neighbourhood watch, with a penchant for arson. Their first target? The nearby 5 Mile house, which they burned to the ground just to set the mood. Then, with all the subtlety of a hammer, they turned their attention to the 6 Mile house. The Fishers, understanding that arson wasn't exactly covered in their insurance policy, evacuated rather quickly. But not before Mr. David Ross, a hapless bystander and temporary watchman, found himself on the wrong end of Lavinia's hospitality. In an incident that would make even the most unflappable innkeeper flinch, Lavinia reportedly tried to choke Mr. Ross and introduced his head to a nearby window in what one might generously call a sudden redecorating. Not long after, another man claimed to have barely escaped an attack at the same inn, which, as you might imagine, was the final straw for Charleston's beleaguered authorities. The sheriff, probably a man who had better things to do with his afternoon, rounded up the Fishers and a few of their associates and found a dead cow. Not exactly a smoking gun, but apparently enough to make the Fishers the talk of the town. And so, despite a remarkable lack of evidence, John and Lavinia were sentenced to death. Though not for murder, mind you, but for robbery. Ah, the good old days when you didn't need solid proof. Just a hunch and a slightly dramatic backstory. John, ever the pragmatist, accepted his fate with the grace of a man who'd seen too much. Lavinia, however, was not so inclined. In a fit of defiance worthy of a soap opera, she cursed everyone from the governor to the guy who probably just brought her lunch, and, with her dying breath, delivered what would become one of Charleston's most famous parting lines. "If you have a message for hell, give it to me. I'll carry it." To this day, whether the Fishers were guilty of anything worse than bad housekeeping is anyone's guess. But one thing is certain. If you ever find yourself checking into a place named after its distance from town, maybe don't unpack your bags. Welcome to Repository of Stories, your hub for classic tales, short stories, historical facts, and lesser-known gems. If you love uncovering fascinating narratives from all corners of history and literature, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for your next great story.